Can you pretend to be my date for one day? The girl begged the CEO millionaire at her ex's wedding. The late afternoon sun spilled gently through the tall windows of the Willow House Community Center, casting warm light across the art room floor. Crayons rolled, paintbrushes dipped. Small hands gripped paper with the focus of little artists creating galaxies of color. In the middle of it all, June Keller knelt beside a boy, carefully painting the outline of a crooked tree. "You're doing great, Leo," she said softly, tucking a strand of golden hair behind her ear. "But what if the leaves were blue instead of green, just to see what happens?" Leo beamed. "Blue like space?" "Exactly." She smiled, but her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for another paint pot. The air carried the scent of acrylics and children's shampoo, and for a while, the noise of the world outside disappeared. Here, in this little room filled with laughter and smudged aprons, June felt safe. That is, until Maggie, the front desk volunteer, poked her head in with a brown envelope in her hand. "June, sorry to interrupt. This just came for you." June stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "Thanks, Maggie. You can leave it there." But Maggie didn't move. "It's kinda fancy." That made her pause. She walked over, took the envelope, and turned it over. Heavy cardstock, gilded edges, embossed lettering, her name printed in silver script across the front. She knew the handwriting before she even opened it. No return address, no signature, but she didn't need one. Her breath caught in her throat. Still, with slow fingers, she opened it. The invitation unfolded like a memory she had buried too deep. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Dr. Caleb Grant and Allison Ray. Saturday, June 14th. The air shifted, her vision blurred just for a second. She could hear the kids in the background laughing, splashing paint. She heard her own heartbeat louder than all of it. June closed the card, held it in her hand, and walked quietly toward the back of the room, where the supply closet gave her a moment's privacy. Inside, she leaned against the shelves. A papier-mâché giraffe stared down at her with googly eyes, oddly sympathetic. She should have been the bride. 2 years ago, almost to the day, she had picked out napkins and centerpieces and saved vows in the Notes app on her phone. The dress had hung in her mother's old closet like a whisper. 3 weeks before the wedding, Caleb had called it off. No real explanation, just, "Something doesn't feel right." A text from Allison 2 days later had come with the same chill. "I hope someday you can understand. We didn't plan this. It just happened." June had deleted both messages, but not the memory. And now they wanted her to watch them tie the knot. Her fingers clenched around the invitation. For a moment, she considered ripping it in half, tossing it into the recycling bin, letting it become someone else's regret. But she didn't. Instead, she exhaled deeply. The kind of breath you take when you're done crying, not when you start. June walked back into the art room. She sat beside Leo again, picking up a paintbrush. "Let's try gold," she said, dipping into the shimmering color. "Gold makes everything feel a little braver." That night, at home in her small but sunlit apartment, June stood by the window, the invitation resting on her desk beside a half-drunk cup of tea. She looked at it one more time. She didn't want revenge. She didn't want to show off or make a scene. She just needed, to walk into that chapel, head high, spine straight, heart intact, not to reopen the wound, but to close it properly. She slipped the invitation back into the envelope, and placed it gently in her drawer. She would go, not for them, but for herself. The gallery buzzed softly with the sounds of polite conversation, champagne glasses clinking, and string music echoing from a nearby trio. Canvases lined the walls of the small venue downtown, most of them painted by children from community art programs. Vibrant, uneven, bursting with emotion. June Keller stood near a display labeled "Brushes of Hope," where 10 small paintings hung proudly. Each one was signed by a child from the orphanage where she volunteered. She wore a soft ivory dress, her blonde hair pinned back loosely, and held a program list in her hand, half reading, half people watching. This fundraiser was supposed to be simple. Show up. Help explain the stories behind the art. Smile politely, nothing more. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. As she turned to adjust a frame that was tilting sideways, the painting by little Emma, a bright explosion of purple flowers, it slipped from its hook and fluttered to the ground. She gasped and bent down quickly, but another hand reached it first. Careful, came a low, steady voice. I think this one was trying to fly. June looked up. He was tall, dark-haired, dressed in a sleek black suit that looked almost too elegant for this room. Sharp features, quiet confidence. But it was the eyes that caught her off guard. Cool blue, observant, lingering just a moment too long. Thank you, she said, taking the painting gently from his hands. He helped her hook it back in place. I like this one, he said, tilting his head slightly as he studied it. It feels unafraid. June blinked. That's Emma. She's 6. She says flowers should never apologize for blooming wherever they want. A soft huff of a laugh escaped him. Smart kid. June smiled. She really is. He offered his hand. Miles Donovan. June paused. The name sounded familiar. Then it clicked. Donovan Developments, luxury resorts, billion-dollar projects. The man the press called the invisible tycoon because no one ever caught him at social events. And here he was, holding a child's painting of purple daisies. She took his hand. June Keller, artist teacher, she corrected. I run art programs for children, mostly in underfunded schools and shelters. Miles nodded. Important work. They stood in comfortable silence, watching another painting fetch a surprisingly high bid across the room. June, still feeling the weight of the invitation tucked away in her purse, tried to keep her smile steady. The thought of the upcoming wedding gnawed at her, even here among paint and piano chords. Then, without fully planning to, she turned to him and said, half laughing, half serious. Can I ask you something crazy? Miles raised an eyebrow. Try me. Her voice was quieter now. Would you pretend to be my date, just for one day? The words hung in the air. She instantly regretted them. I don't mean anything weird, she added quickly, color rushing to her cheeks. It's just, my ex is getting married to someone who used to be close to me. And I got invited, and I'm fine, really, you don't want to go alone. He finished for her. June let out a breath. Exactly. Miles studied her face for a moment. There was no trace of mockery in his expression, no smug curiosity, just quiet consideration. Then, slowly, the corner of his mouth curved into the ghost of a smile. All right, he said. One day. June blinked. Wait, really? One day, he repeated, offering his hand again, not for a shake this time, but more like a formal agreement. But you have to promise me something. What? He leaned in slightly. You tell me exactly what I'm walking into. June grinned, heart pounding in disbelief. Deal. The late afternoon sun bathed the countryside estate in gold. White roses lined the walkways, and the villa's ivory stone walls shimmered under the light. String music drifted from the garden. Guests milled about in polished elegance, and everything looked pulled from a luxury wedding magazine. Then June arrived. She stepped out of a sleek black car, her midnight blue dress hugging her figure with quiet power. Her blonde hair was pinned loosely, soft waves framing her face. She walked gracefully across the marble path, heels clicking softly, on her arm, Miles Donovan, tailored charcoal suit, no tie, collar slightly open, effortlessly confident, mysterious. But his focus was only on her. As the grand doors opened, a hush swept the hall, heads turned, glasses paused midair. The quartet stumbled for a beat. June walked forward, Miles by her side, chin high. Her pulse thundered, but her steps didn't falter. Not when every eye found her, not even when they found his. Caleb Grant, in a black tuxedo, stood near the front of the room. Beside him, in a fitted lace gown, stood Allison Ray, June's former best friend, his new bride. Allison's smile slipped barely. But June saw it. A flicker of something, shock, unease, beneath the veil of perfection. Caleb's eyes locked onto June like a man seeing a ghost, like memory had taken shape and walked through his new life. June gave them a cool, unreadable smile, then turned to sign the guest book. Miles rested his hand lightly on the small of her back, steady, grounding. He leaned in, barely audible. "Is this how weddings normally feel?" she whispered. "What do you mean?" "The staring, the tension, the drama." June smirked. "You're the mystery billionaire. They're staring at you." He glanced around. "No, they're staring at the woman who just rewrote her story the second she walked through the door." She looked away, smile faltering. Her gaze drifted toward the altar. The ache was still there. Not love, just history. The ceremony took place in the garden. June and Miles sat in the fourth row, not front, not hidden. The bride walked under a white floral arch. Caleb stood waiting, lips stiff, eyes wandering, not toward Allison. June noticed. So did Allison. After vows were exchanged, the celebration moved inside. Chandeliers lit the ballroom. Gold-rimmed glasses clinked. Music swirled around them. But June felt far away from it all. She barely touched her drink, barely spoke, just watched. Watched as the life she once imagined unfolded without her. At their table, Miles leaned closer. "If I didn't know better, I'd say someone regrets letting you go." June gave a small sigh. "That's not what this is about." "I know." He paused. "But you look like the chapter he never finished." She turned, meeting his eyes, pain, amusement, surprise, all flickering at once. "You're good at reading people." "I build resorts for a living. Reading rooms is part of the job." She smiled then. A real one. Small but true. "You're not just pretending anymore, are you?" Miles didn't flinch. "Not sure I ever was." Across the ballroom, Allison stared, her champagne untouched, her posture too still. Caleb only looked away when Miles covered June's hand with his own. Guests noticed. Whispers began again. But they were different now. The woman once left behind had returned, not just graceful, but whole, with someone, but more importantly, with herself. And as the string quartet played on, June sat straighter. She had come to close a door. Instead, she had just opened a new one. The reception hall glowed under golden chandeliers, laughter and string music weaving through the conversations. Plates clinked, glasses chimed, and servers flowed through the tables like clockwork. It was, by all appearances, the perfect evening, until the questions started. June and Miles were seated at table 7, close enough to the head table to be noticed, but not quite enough to be included. Still, they had attracted attention all night. A woman in a sequined champagne dress leaned toward Miles, smiling with polite curiosity. "So, what do you do, Mr. Donovan?" Miles's fork paused briefly midair before he smiled, calm and unreadable. "I work in development." "Development?" she echoed. "Tech, real estate, both," he replied smoothly, his tone casual but clearly uninterested in elaborating. "Mostly quiet projects. I try to keep a low profile." A few guests nearby exchanged glances. June gave him a look as if to say, "You don't have to answer," but he only offered her the faintest smile in return. Then, from 2 seats over, a voice cut through the table with sharp precision. "Interesting," Caleb said, swirling his wine glass. "Low profile, yet somehow making quite the impression tonight." June stiffened, her shoulders tightening. Miles turned to him slowly, his expression unreadable. "You have a point?" Caleb shrugged, the corners of his mouth lifting into something too close to a smirk. "Only that not all attention is earned. Sometimes it's bought or borrowed." June's breath caught. The table grew quiet. Caleb's eyes flicked toward June. "I mean, I suppose anyone can show up with a +1, say there's someone important, and suddenly everyone believes it." "Miles," June began softly, but he gently squeezed her hand under the table. He turned fully to Caleb, voice quiet but steady. "You're right. Anyone can bring a date to look important, just like anyone can keep a fiancé to look committed while sleeping with her best friend." The words hit the table like glass shattering. Silence. Even the violinist paused a beat too long before continuing the music. Caleb's face drained of color. June blinked. What? Miles kept his gaze locked on Caleb. 3 weeks before the wedding, you were already seeing Allison. June had no idea. But she was convenient, sweet, loyal, good for your image, so you kept her around until it got too complicated. Miles, June whispered, stunned. How do you even know this? He looked at her then, and his voice softened. I do my research. A few people at nearby tables were already whispering. One of the bridesmaids looked visibly shaken. Allison, seated at the head table, had gone completely still, her eyes darting between Caleb and the man who had just peeled away every layer of their carefully constructed story. Caleb tried to laugh, but it came out thin, brittle. That's a wild accusation. Miles didn't flinch. It's not an accusation. It's the truth. He stood slowly, placing his napkin on the table. June deserves more than whispers and manipulation. She deserved better 2 years ago, and she still does now. Then, turning to June, he extended his hand. Come on, you don't owe this room anything. She looked up at him, still processing, still reeling. But then she stood, and the moment her fingers found his, everything else blurred. Behind them, the wedding continued. But at that table, something ended. Something else began. Dinner was in full swing. Laughter rippled across the candlelit tables. Silverware clinked softly, and champagne flowed as if the evening itself was celebrating. June sat at the edge of the room beside Miles, her posture calm, but her fingers nervously twisting the edge of her napkin. She could feel the glances, subtle, curious, calculating. Whispers passed between guests like wind moving through tall grass. Across from them, a woman in a jeweled gown leaned forward with a polite smile. So, Mr. Donovan, she asked, what line of work are you in? Miles looked up, cool and effortless. I manage a few development projects. Real estate? She prodded. He gave a vague smile. Among other things. The woman chuckled, intrigued. Well, you certainly made an entrance tonight. Before he could respond, another voice chimed in from the next table, measured but laced with something colder. Right, Caleb said, swirling his wine. Amazing what a suit and silence can do. June flinched. Miles didn't look at Caleb. Instead, he sipped his water. Caleb continued louder. I mean, no one even knows who this guy is. Just shows up with June, steals half the attention, and people act like he's royalty. Miles doesn't need to prove anything, June said quietly. Caleb gave a tight smile. Oh, I'm not judging. I get it. Some people need a prop, someone on their arm to sell a better story. That was enough. Miles set his glass down with care. Then, in a voice calm and razor-sharp, he spoke. Speaking of stories, I think some of your guests might enjoy hearing yours. Caleb's smirk faded, just slightly. Miles turned his full attention to the table. 2 years ago, June was engaged to this man. 3 weeks before their wedding, he was already sleeping with someone else. Gasps broke out at the table. Allison, seated at the head table, went rigid. June stared at Miles in shock. You used her. Miles continued, eyes never leaving Caleb. Made her the perfect fiancée, sweet, respectable, trusting, while you kept your real relationship hidden with Allison. The air was sucked out of the room. Caleb opened his mouth, but no words came. June whispered, Miles, how do you know all this? He finally turned to her, voice softer now. I do my research. Across the room, murmurs rose. People turned, confused and stunned. A few even stood slightly, craning to see better. Allison's wine glass slipped from her fingers, shattering softly against the floor. Miles stood, straightening his jacket. You deserve the truth, he said, not just to June, but to everyone listening. June rose beside him, unsure if her knees would hold. Her breath trembled, but her eyes were steady. They walked away together, past shocked faces and shattered illusions. Behind them, a wedding tried to carry on, but nothing felt quite the same again. The laughter and clinking glasses inside the grand ballroom felt a world away from where June now stood. She had slipped out the side door, heels crunching softly against the gravel as she made her way to the back garden, the same one where 2 years ago she had imagined exchanging vows under strings of fairy lights and white roses. Now it was lit by nothing but the moon. She sank slowly onto the edge of a stone bench, the chill of it cutting through her silk dress. The distant hum of music barely touched her ears. She stared ahead, eyes unfocused, her breath uneven. Everything inside her was still spinning. Caleb's face when Miles had spoken. The gasps, the judgment, and most of all, the truth. She hadn't known. Not really, not fully. And now part of her wished she'd never come. A quiet laugh escaped her lips, dry, bitter. "What was I thinking?" she whispered into the night, her hands curled into her lap. She remembered the shame of those final days before her wedding, the unanswered texts, the cancelled fittings, Caleb's cold, rehearsed speech when he left her. She had blamed herself for being too much, or not enough. And now here she was again, just more exposed, this time with a stranger beside her who never asked for any of this. She wiped at her eyes roughly, swallowing the lump in her throat. "June!" The voice was soft, steady. She turned. Miles stood a few steps behind her. His tie was loose, jacket unbuttoned, but his posture was still firm, still grounded, as if nothing that happened inside had shaken him. She opened her mouth. "I'm sorry," she blurted. "You didn't sign up for this." Miles said nothing for a moment. Then he walked over and sat beside her carefully, deliberately. "Not too close. I asked you to pretend for one day," she continued, her voice cracking. "And I dragged you into all of this, drama, history, pain." He looked straight ahead, not at her. "You didn't drag me. I walked in. I shouldn't have come," she whispered. Miles turned to her then. "You had every right to be here." She shook her head. "I thought I wanted closure, but maybe I just wanted to prove something to myself, to them. I don't even know anymore." The wind stirred the leaves in the hedges. A rose petal drifted past her feet. She moved to stand, but his hand caught hers. Firm, warm, steady. "You asked me for one day," he said softly. "I'm not letting you face it alone now." June froze. No one had ever said words like that to her. Not when it mattered, not when she was breaking. Slowly she sat back down. Either of them spoke. There were no declarations, no promises, just the stillness of the night and the space between them. Her fingers stayed in his. And for the first time in a long time, June let herself lean, not into grief, not into memory, but into something present, something real. The stars blinked overhead, and far inside the mansion, the music swelled again. But out here, under the soft hush of the garden trees, two people sat quietly, strangers no longer, finding in one broken moment the fragile beginning of something whole. By morning, the internet had already decided who she was. Photos of June walking into the wedding with Miles Donovan were plastered across gossip sites. One headline screamed, "From ex-fiancé to Millionaire's mystery date, who is June Keller?" Another, less subtle, "Teacher turned temptress." Some articles dug deeper, unearthing old posts about her cancelled engagement 2 years ago. Others speculated that she'd planned it all, that she had always aimed higher, hidden ambition behind modest smiles. June scrolled through the noise in silence, her hands trembling. At the Community Arts Center, where she had always found peace, the air felt heavier. A few parents quietly withdrew their children from her class that morning. Others smiled too tightly, spoke too little. Whispers followed her down the halls. Even some of her colleagues, usually warm and supportive, gave her strange sidelong glances, sympathetic or suspicious, she couldn't tell. By lunchtime, June had packed up her supplies, walked into the director's office, and slid a folded letter across the desk. Her resignation, no explanation, just a quiet decision. She would disappear before she became a headline again. That evening, she dressed simply in black and arrived early at the Arcadia Foundation Gala, intending only to show her face briefly and leave. The grand ballroom sparkled with chandeliers, champagne flutes, and silent auction displays. Everyone who was anyone was there. June kept to the edges, speaking little, offering polite nods. She had no appetite, no patience for small talk. She only wanted to vanish quietly after doing the decent thing. She was halfway to the exit when the lights dimmed and the MC's voice rang out over the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Miles Donovan." June froze. Every head turned toward the stage where Miles, impeccably dressed, effortlessly poised, walked under the spotlight. She panicked. This wasn't the plan. Then he spoke. "I don't usually make speeches," he began, his voice calm but weighted. "But tonight I need to." A hush swept through the room. "I met someone recently, someone who reminded me that grace doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it walks in quietly, holding its own pain, but still choosing to be kind." People shifted in their seats. Phones came out. Cameras rolled. Miles looked straight ahead and then, without hesitation, reached his hand toward the audience. "June!" Spotlights turned, faces followed, gasps, all eyes on her. She felt frozen, every instinct screaming to run. But he waited, hands still outstretched, gaze steady. Slowly, as if in a dream, she moved forward. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor until she reached the stage. He took her hand. "She didn't just walk into my life," Miles said, eyes not leaving hers. "She reminded me what living feels like." He paused. The room held its breath. "She didn't just save the night. She saved me." For a moment, nothing. Then applause, tentative at first, then growing, rising into a standing ovation. June blinked through the lights, barely able to breathe. But beside her, Miles's grip was sure, warm. That night, the headlines changed. "A healing kind of love. The real story behind the woman in black, not a scandal, a second chance. The healing couple," one Vietnamese blog called them. "The healing pair." And for the first time in 2 years, June didn't feel like someone who had been left behind. She felt like someone who had been chosen to stay. 1 year later, June Keller no longer walked hospital halls. She hadn't returned to teaching at the Arts Center either. Instead, she had built something entirely new, small, warm, full of color. It started with an old warehouse space near the edge of town, donated quietly by Arcadia Developments. June turned it into a free community art studio for underprivileged children, a place where kids could paint on the walls, leave handprints on the doors, and dream without permission. There were no uniforms, no schedules, just light pouring through wide windows and laughter echoing across drying canvases. She called it the Color Room. Every Tuesday and Thursday, June sat cross-legged on the floor in paint-stained jeans, showing 6-year-olds how to mix green from blue and yellow. She kept her long blonde hair tied in a messy knot, and wore clay earrings gifted to her by a shy little girl who once hated being seen. Her days were simple, steady, safe. And Miles, he changed, too. Gone was the shadowy figure once known as the Invisible Tycoon. Miles Donovan had stepped out from behind the curtain, just a little. He still refused interviews and declined magazine covers, but his presence in the world was no longer a secret. He appeared at local fundraisers, sat in city planning meetings, and walked through new housing sites with rolled-up sleeves and dust on his shoes. He still wore black, still chose silence over small talk, but there was a softness in him now, a steadiness that people noticed. Most weeks, he could be found at the Color Room, usually in the back garden, repainting benches with June or fixing the broken easel someone knocked over again. They didn't flaunt their relationship. They never posted about it. They never posed for headlines. There were no grand declarations, no public proposals, just the quiet rhythm of two people choosing each other again and again. Every Monday morning, without fail, Miles would arrive before the kids. He never stayed long, just enough time to place a small glass jar on the table in the front window. Inside it, a fresh stem of camellia, always white, always new. June never asked how he knew it was her favorite flower. She had never told him, not out loud, but somehow he knew. Sometimes he left a note tucked beneath the jar. "For your light, Because Mondays deserve something gentle. Still your one-day date. June kept them all in a small wooden box beside her desk. She never said much about them, but when she opened that box, her smile always changed. Some evenings, after the children had gone home, they would sit outside with mugs of tea and a radio playing old jazz. June painted little stars across the garden fence. Miles sanded a wooden chair. They spoke in pieces, about nothing, about everything. And that was how their love existed, not in firework displays, but in paint-splattered shoes and mismatched mugs, in shared glances across crowded rooms, in the quiet understanding that after everything, the shame, the hurt, the headlines, they had somehow found their way to something real, to something worth keeping. That one day, just one, had turned out to be the beginning. And neither of them had walked away. The wind carried the scent of falling leaves and distant wood smoke as autumn gave way to its last golden breath. On that particular late afternoon, Miles invited June back to the art center, not the old warehouse, but the new one they had built together, the place where every wall told a story in color, the place where something had first begun with one small pretend. Inside the main hall, soft laughter echoed off freshly painted walls. Children gathered at long wooden tables for what they called the Winter Paint Day, an annual tradition now. Scarves and mittens were tossed aside as little fingers dipped into cool blues and silvers. June entered with paintbrushes tucked behind her ear and a scarf wrapped twice around her neck. The moment she stepped in, she paused. The mural still hung in its original place. One day, one chance. It read in bold strokes, a swirl of blues and golds beneath it, painted by 20 pairs of tiny hands and 2 grown-ups who had no idea what that one day would mean. She smiled faintly, her hand brushing over the edge of the canvas as if greeting an old friend. Behind her, Miles stood quietly for a moment, watching her. Then he stepped forward and touched her elbow. "There's something I wanted to say here," he said softly, his voice almost swallowed by the laughter of children. She turned toward him, but before she could respond, he dropped to one knee. The room went still. The children froze in mid-paint, mouths open. The teachers gasped softly. June blinked, eyes wide, lips parted in disbelief. Miles pulled a small velvet box from his coat pocket and opened it with quiet resolve. Inside was a ring, elegant and simple, just like her. He looked up at her, and his voice was steady. "You asked me to pretend, just for one day," he said, the edges of his words brushing up against emotion. "But I've lived every day since then hoping you'd let me make it real." June's eyes filled instantly, one hand flying to her chest, the other trembling slightly by her side. Miles smiled, a little softer now. "June Keller, will you stop pretending with me and be my real forever?" For a heartbeat, the world was silent. Then she let out a breath that felt like a release, like every unsaid thing she had carried since the day she handed him that impossible request. She dropped to her knees in front of him, arms flung around his shoulders, laughing through her tears. "Yes," she whispered, breathless. "Yes, I will." The room erupted. Children cheered. Paintbrushes flew. Teachers clapped. One little boy shouted, "They're getting married!" and ran in circles around them. Miles and June laughed, still holding each other, like they had waited a lifetime for that moment. And maybe, in some ways, they had. Outside, snow had begun to fall, gentle and slow, like it too had waited for this. As evening settled over the neighborhood, Miles and June stood hand in hand outside the newly built facility. The windows glowed warmly behind them, filled with color and light and movement. Above the doorway, etched in soft gold against navy blue, a new sign sparkled beneath the falling snow. "The Keller Donovan Arts Center for Children Who Still Believe in Second Chances." And underneath it, carved smaller into the wood, "No longer pretending. Thank you for watching. Can you pretend to be my date for one day?" A story that began as a favor and turned into something real. Sometimes one brave question can change everything. If this touched your heart, hit the hype button and subscribe to Soul Tapestry for more tales of love, healing, and second chances. Until next time, stay kind, stay brave, and remember, one day can change a life.